You post something online. Then you check your phone. Once. Twice. 10 minutes later, you check again. Did anyone like it? Did they agree? Did they notice? And even if you would never admit it, your mood begins to move with the numbers. A compliment lifts you. Silence disappoints you. Criticism follows you into the evening. Nothing physical has happened to you. No door has closed. No food has disappeared from your table. No storm has destroyed your home. And yet, somewhere inside, it feels as though something important has been taken away. Approval. We often think approval is simply something pleasant to receive. A compliment. A smile. A sign that we belong. But slowly, without noticing, approval can become something we believe we need. And once you need the world to confirm your worth, the world begins to control your peace. More than 2,000 years ago, Taoist thinkers warned about this problem. Although they used very different words, they knew nothing about social media, nothing about follower counts, nothing about algorithms, performance reviews, personal brands, or online reputation. But they understood something much older. The moment you become too concerned with how you appear, you begin to lose contact with what you actually are. The Tao Te Ching, traditionally associated with Lao Tzu, emerged from ancient China during a time of political instability, social competition, and constant struggles for status and power. Its exact authorship and date remain debated, but over the centuries, it became one of the foundational works of Taoist philosophy. Again and again, the Tao Te Ching points toward a strange kind of strength, a strength that does not advertise itself, a wisdom that does not need to prove itself, a life that does not depend on applause. In chapter 22, the sage is described as someone who does not display himself, yet becomes clear, someone who does not constantly justify himself, yet becomes recognized. And this principle appears throughout the Tao Te Ching. What is truly valuable does not need constant announcement. Water does not tell the valley that it is useful. A tree does not ask the forest whether it deserves to grow. The moon does not wait for applause before rising. Nature simply follows its nature. Taoism has a word closely connected to this idea: Ziran. It is often translated as naturalness, spontaneity, or simply being so of itself. To live naturally does not mean following every impulse. It does not mean doing whatever you want, whenever you want. It means becoming less divided inside. Your actions begin to come from what the situation actually requires, rather than from the image you are trying to maintain. And this is where approval becomes dangerous. Because when approval becomes your goal, you stop asking, "What is right for me to do?" And you begin asking, "How will this make me look?" Those are very different questions. Most approval seeking does not look dramatic. It looks reasonable. You soften an opinion because you are afraid someone might disagree. You stay in a relationship because other people think you make a good couple. You choose a career because your family respects the title. You buy something because you imagine how other people will see you using it. You say yes because saying no might disappoint someone. You remain silent because you do not want to appear difficult. Eventually, an invisible audience moves into your mind, and before every decision, you consult them. What will they think? Will they understand? Will they approve? Will they still like me? The strange thing is, this audience may not even exist. People are often far less concerned with our lives than we imagine, but their imagined judgment becomes real enough to shape our behavior. Taoism invites us to loosen this relationship, not by becoming cold, not by becoming arrogant, and not by pretending other people do not matter, but by recognizing the difference between listening to others and living for their approval. Wisdom can listen without surrendering. There is another problem with approval. It never stays still. Imagine that everyone around you approves of who you are today. Tomorrow, the expectations change. Perhaps your career should be more successful. Your house should be larger. Your body should look different. You should get married. You should have children. You should travel more. You should settle down. You should speak more. You should speak less. You should be ambitious. You should be content. There is no final moment. When society gathers around you and says, "You have done enough. You may now rest," the target keeps moving, because the target belongs to other people. This is one reason the Taoist sage refuses unnecessary comparison. In Chapter 20 of the Tao Te Ching, we encounter a narrator who seems strangely separate from the excitement, the values, and the judgments of the crowd. Others hurry toward what they desire. The sage remains different. This does not necessarily mean rejecting society. It points toward something subtler: independence from collective excitement. The crowd may know what it wants, but that does not mean the crowd knows what your life requires. Consider two people. Both appear generous. The first gives because generosity feels right. The second gives because he wants to be seen as generous. From the outside, their actions may look identical. Inside, they are completely different. The first person is free. The second person needs an audience. Taoist philosophy repeatedly warns us about this difference. The more aggressively we try to display virtue, intelligence, power, or importance, the further we may drift from the thing itself. Chapter 24 of the Tao Te Ching uses the image of someone standing on tiptoe, trying to make himself taller. But standing on tiptoe does not make a person steady. An exaggerated self-display does not create lasting distinction. Trying too hard to appear impressive creates instability. Think about people who constantly need to remind everyone that they are successful, or intelligent, or powerful, or spiritual. Sometimes, the need to advertise an identity reveals how fragile that identity has become. Someone who knows where they stand does not need to announce it every 5 minutes. The mountain does not argue about its height. Now imagine something very ordinary. You are sitting in a meeting at work. Your manager asks the team if anyone can take responsibility for another project. Your calendar is already full. You have been working late several nights a week. You know that accepting another responsibility will reduce the quality of your existing work and take even more time away from your personal life. No one raises their hand. The room becomes quiet, and suddenly, you feel the pressure. You imagine your manager thinking, maybe you are not committed. You imagine your coworkers seeing you as lazy, so you raise your hand, and you say, "I can take it." For 5 seconds, you feel relief. Your manager smiles. You received approval. And then, you spend the next 6 weeks exhausted. This is approval seeking, in one of its most common forms. The Taoist response is not to become rebellious. It is not to refuse simply because you can. It is to remove unnecessary force. A more Taoist response might be, "I can help with part of the project, but taking full ownership would compromise the deadlines I already have." If this becomes the priority, we should decide which existing responsibility moves. Notice what changed. You did not attack anyone. You did not apologize for existing. You did not explain your entire life. You simply responded to reality. Your schedule has limits. Your energy has limits. The situation has limits. Taoism begins by seeing what is actually there, instead of forcing reality to match an image. This is one way to understand Wu Wei. Wu Wei is sometimes translated as non-action. But it does not mean doing nothing. It does not mean laziness. And it does not mean passivity. It points toward action. Without unnecessary forcing. You still act. You still make decisions. You still participate in life. But you stop wasting energy. maintaining appearances that reality cannot support. One of the hardest parts of giving up approval is accepting that some people will misunderstand you. You can explain yourself clearly and still be misunderstood. You can behave kindly and still be disliked. You can make the right decision and still disappoint someone. You can live honestly and still be criticized. There is no technique that allows you to remain completely authentic while also guaranteeing universal approval. Eventually, you have to choose. Will you live according to what you sincerely understand to be true, or will you continuously edit yourself so that nobody is uncomfortable? The second option sounds peaceful, but it is not. Because every time you abandon yourself just to avoid someone else's disappointment, resentment quietly grows inside you. You become angry at people for expectations you agreed to obey. Taoism offers another possibility. Do not fight every opinion. Do not chase every misunderstanding. Do not turn every criticism into a courtroom where you must defend your entire existence. Let some things pass. Not every judgment requires an answer. Not every person needs to understand you. And here is our channel's perspective. The goal is not to stop caring what people think. Taken literally, that can become foolish. Feedback matters. Reputation sometimes matters. The opinions of people we trust can protect us from mistakes we cannot see ourselves. The real problem begins when feedback becomes permission. There is a difference between asking, "Can this person teach me something?" and asking, "Does this person have the authority to decide my worth?" The first is humility. The second is dependence. A mature person can receive criticism without automatically obeying it. They can receive praise without becoming addicted to it. Praise becomes information. Criticism becomes information. Neither becomes identity. That, to us, is one of the most useful ways to understand Taoist freedom today. You do not need to build a wall against the world. You simply stop handing the world the keys to your inner life. Something interesting happens when you begin seeking less approval. At first, you may feel exposed. You may wonder whether people still like you. You may begin noticing how often you used to explain yourself, how often you exaggerated your achievements, how often you apologized for perfectly reasonable boundaries, how often you said things you did not believe just to keep a conversation comfortable. Then, slowly, life becomes quieter. You stop trying to impress people who were never paying that much attention. You stop arguing with strangers whose opinions will have no effect on your life tomorrow. You become more careful about promises because you no longer make them simply to look generous. And your relationships may become more honest because when you stop constantly performing, people finally have a chance to meet the person underneath the performance. Some may leave. Others may come closer. Both outcomes tell you something useful. So the next time you feel yourself seeking approval, do not immediately try to suppress the feeling. Just notice it. And then, ask yourself 3 questions. If nobody knew I made this choice, would I still make it? Am I responding to reality or managing an image? And if this person disapproved, would the decision still be right? You do not need perfect answers. The questions themselves create space. And in that space, something quieter can appear. Your own judgment. Not ego. Not rebellion. Not the need to be different. Simply, a more honest awareness of what the moment requires. That quiet space is very close to the spirit of Taoism. Less forcing. Less performance. Less noise. You will never control what everyone thinks about you. And the more energy you spend trying, the less energy remains for actually living. There will always be someone who misunderstands your choices. Someone who thinks you should be richer, quieter, louder, younger, more successful, more conventional, more ambitious, or simply more like them. Let them think. The river does not stop flowing because someone dislikes its direction. The tree does not apologize for growing toward the light, and you do not need universal permission to live according to what you sincerely understand. Listen to good advice. Correct yourself when you are wrong. Treat people with respect, but do not confuse applause with truth. Do not confuse rejection with failure. And do not spend your life performing for an audience whose expectations will never stop changing. The Tao does not ask you to become impressive. It asks you to become natural. And sometimes, the beginning of that freedom is very simple. Stop seeking approval. Start living.